Welcome to this installment of the B3 SB 2030 Education Series. This one is about building handoff and turning a building over to the building owner that functions correctly at the outset and that they are able to keep functioning correctly for the lifetime of the building. And it's called Beyond Cutsheets and Keys, Best Practices in Building Handoff. The presenters today are myself, Garrett Mosman, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Sustainable Building Research at University of Minnesota, and Cody Meshke, Mechanical Engineer with Center for Energy and Environment. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to talk about the goal, which is energy efficiency, plus a whole lot of other things that building operators are concerned about. Then we'll talk about the SB 2030 software tool for energy efficient operation. Following that, Cody will take over and do a discussion about building commissioning, and then talk about a bit about the project deliverables that are required for building operators to be able to operate efficiently. And following that, talk a little bit about common deficiencies and deliverables that don't end up in the hands of the building operator. And then an ideal process for building handoff that really starts in pre-design. So a little bit about this goal. Building operators' goals start with providing a safe environment for building occupants. So this includes, protection from excessive CO2, excessive moisture, mold, pathogens, and things like that. That's the top priority. Their second priority is to maintain a comfortable environment, and their phones will ring off the hook if they're not doing that. So they're well aware if things aren't comfortable. The third is to avoid premature equipment failure. So typically they have a lot of preventative maintenance procedures in place to ensure that equipment functions reliably over time. Fourth is to maintain equipment capacity. And then finally, the fifth thing that they're after is to maintain energy efficient operation. Now, what are we talking about when we talk about energy efficient operation? Is it about this year's utility bills versus last year's utility bills, or is it something a little more subtle? We think it's something a little bit more subtle, and this definition comes from Peter Herzog, who used to work with me on the SB 2030 project and wrote this book called Energy Efficient Operation of Commercial Buildings, Redefining the Energy Manager's Job. And his definition of any energy efficient operation is to ensure that each significant energy consuming device uses only as much energy as necessary to perform its intended function. So, and performing its intended function is key. So we're not saying, shut off the outdoor air dampers when it's cold because it costs too much money. That compromises indoor air quality and human health. So we want the intended function to be held clear and true, and we want to make sure that the devices are able to meet that load using the minimum amount of energy possible. In the field, we see that building operators do a good job at keeping occupants comfortable and protecting system components. They have all kinds of belt changes, filter changes, and et cetera. And like I said, if the building occupants are hot or cold, then the building operator is going to hear about that. However, they don't typically routinely in most settings go and check for what we would call hidden energy waste that doesn't make their phone ring. And buildings that are not routinely checking for this kind of unannounced energy waste are using 10 to 35% more energy than they need to. Well, how does that happen? So here's a hypothetical energy curve of a new building. So energy consumption is on the y-axis here on the left. The red line indicates energy use over time. And so a new building is delivered. Ideally, it will have been well documented, commissioned using an effective commissioning process. And so in theory, it's using as little energy as possible to perform those intended functions. But immediately things start to change. Set points get altered, dampers may get stuck, actuators break, things fail, adjustments are made, and so energy use tends to go up over time. And so left unchecked, it just continues to do so. Periodically in many buildings, there will be a retrocommissioning study that comes in and ratchets that energy use back down to some lower level, some sort of theoretical minimum of energy use, but then it starts to climb again. So what we're talking about here are additional energy savings that come from routine monitoring of significant energy consumers. And what would a malfunction, for instance, look like? Here's sort of two sides of the same coin. And we're looking at, on the right-hand side here, basically a diagram like you might find in a building automation system of an air handler, and that air handler is delivering air to a space that's over here on the right side. So in both of these cases, the top one and the bottom one, the outdoor air temperature is 50 degrees. The return air temperature here is 75 degrees. The supply air temperature to the space is 60 degrees. There are 30,000 CFM of air being delivered to that space. And in both cases, the occupants are happy. So all outward appearances would suggest in both of these cases that everything's going fine. But in the upper case, you'll see that there's the space is calling for 60-degree air to be delivered to make the thermostat happy, to meet the set point. So we're bringing back 75-degree air. The economizer is functioning correctly, so it's mixing the 50-degree outdoor air with the 75-degree return air and achieving a 60-degree mixed air temperature, which then goes through the deactivated heating and cooling coils, through the fan, through the ductwork, and is delivered to the space at the appropriate 60 degrees. Here in the bottom, there are a number of malfunctions. First, the economizer is not functioning correctly. So right off the bat, the mixed air temperature is 5 degrees too warm because they're incorporating too much mixed air, too much return air. In addition, there's a heating valve that's stuck open a little bit. So we're adding 2 degrees of heat to the airflow off the heating coil. So now it's 67 degrees. Then the cooling coil is overcooling, dropping the temperature down to 55 degrees, but that's okay. We can still be comfortable because there's a reheat coil here in the VAV box such that the air leaving the diffuser is the same 60 degrees that it's supposed to be. Now, in the first case, because everything's functioning correctly, you're expending 0 BTUs per hour of heating or cooling energy. By contrast, in the bottom case, with the heating coil being slightly activated, the cooling coil overdoing it, and then the reheat coil adding 5 more degrees at the end, you're burning 615,600 BTUs per hour, all while the occupants have no idea that anything is going wrong, nor does the building operator unless they actually go look for this malfunction. So again, the goal is to ensure that each significant energy consuming device uses only as much energy as necessary to perform its intended function. In our SB 2030 Energy Efficient Operations program, we approach this by creating a customized protocol composed of well-defined tasks that are performed on a routine basis. And a few attributes of these tasks, they're as simple as needed to accommodate the skill level. So there might be some cases where you have a very sophisticated building staff. They can look at trend logs, look at things over time, but you can also train somebody to go in and just look at this at a moment in time and determine right now, is this functioning correctly or not? The tasks occur as infrequently as possible, and that's to minimize the load on operations staff that are already overburdened and very busy people. And they're targeted to identify significant energy waste, so they're only looking at the biggest energy consumers, and that waste would not otherwise be noticed by occupants or operators unless they went to go and look for it, like that previous example. So this energy efficient operations program, we have a tool to help building facilities owners and operators do this. This tool, it's a web-based software application. I sign buildings up for it, and then they're free to set it up, or I can help do that. But it has to be set up by somebody knowledgeable about the building systems and the way that they're supposed to work. As I mentioned, it's composed of as few a number of tasks performed as infrequently as possible, to identify the majority of energy waste potential. So we're not looking at little fans, little pumps, little devices that are going to consume a lot of time. And even if a malfunction is discovered, it's not going to be that meaningful. We're looking at large energy consumers and ways they can easily waste energy without anybody noticing. The tool sends automated email alerts when tasks are due and includes detailed instructions on how to complete the task. So even if the person doing this is not really a sophisticated building operator or building engineer, they'll be able to follow the instructions and get in there and find what needs to be found. If they find a malfunction, they submit a report to the facility manager, who then receives an email that there's been a malfunction. And it includes a dashboard view for the facility manager to be able to look at the status of all the systems and all the tasks and see if things are out of line. It also notifies the facilities manager if tasks are overdue so that they can prompt their staff to go in and complete these things. Oh, I'll mention on this previous slide, that's an example. That's a screenshot of a mixed air temperature task, which would catch a part of the malfunction that we looked at in the air handler example. And this screenshot is of a scheduling task. And it turns out that things running when nobody's in the building or things running when they're not supposed to is among the very, very top energy wasting malfunctions that persist for long periods of time because nobody's there to notice them. This tool is not a substitute for commissioning or retrocommissioning. We've gone into multiple buildings to try and help people set these up, and there's no documentation of as-built sequence of operation. Nobody really knows how the thing is supposed to run, and that makes it impossible to set up a check so that you can identify correct operation. So the setup process requires a building that has identified and documented correct energy efficient operating parameters. It's also not focused on capital improvements. So controls contractors might sell you controls to save energy. Mechanical system equipment manufacturers might sell you a boiler or a chiller. This isn't about any of that. It's strictly focused on the equipment that the building has and ensuring that is operating in an energy efficient manner as possible. So that's kind of the introduction to this. If you have any questions, here's my email address, Garrett Mosman at the Center for Sustainable Building Research. And I'm going to get ready to turn this over to Cody.
Thank you, Garrett. Give me one moment as we switch screens here, and I can present the next portion of our presentation. So let's make sure I've got the right screen. Nope, let's do a different screen. One moment, bear with me. There we go. So again, thank you, Garrett, for kind of that introduction and kind of your take too on, energy efficient operations. And so the next portion of this presentation is going to be focused on new building commissioning. And we're going to go over benefits of commissioning, both those that are, tangible, you can see, and those that just aren't seen and well known. We'll go over kind of deficiencies sometimes that are, maybe sometimes seen in commissioning projects or projects with commissioning, and also provide key takeaways to make the commissioning process as efficient as possible for both the engineer, the contractors, the owner, and the commissioning agent to ensure all parties complete the project and what the owner is looking to have when they occupy the building. So the first thing we're going to talk about before we get into what exactly new building commissioning is why commissioning might be needed. Many buildings are not commissioned, which essentially having kind of a third party check operations of different systems and envelopes. So just as a recognizable thing. We'll kind of go through a few just common building issues that I myself, as a commissioning agent, have seen out in the field. The first being design deficiencies. Many times there can be, deadlines are high or very short for many engineers and architects, and so sometimes designs are rushed so they can get projects out the door. Unfortunately, the repercussion of that is there can be, deficiencies, things of that nature, things that may just not have been caught during the design process. And one of the key takeaways we'll talk about later in the presentation is having a commissioning agent on board with all the different parties as early as possible. So pre-design is where commissioning can really show its benefits. Getting early on and being able to assist with suggesting efficient operations, providing and coordinating plan review workshops. So unfortunately, without that, sometimes deficiencies can come across in the design documents themselves. The next would be, unfortunately, just missing equipment in general. During the construction phase, part of a commissioning agent's task is to review construction mechanical control submittals and ensure that what the engineer designed is what's going to be ordered and sent to the site for then the contractor to construct and to install. Sometimes these simple checks just aren't done and things can kind of just get passed through, which leads to construction orders, things of that nature, arising later, increasing costs. The next would just be during the installation of mechanical equipment or envelopes, things of that nature. Unfortunately, things can also just be rushed during the construction process. And so the correct installation for how the engineer or architect might have designed is not always necessarily performed. And part of, again, commissioning agent's task is to do periodic site visits and to ensure that the construction process is going as designed, as spec, as what the engineer planned. So a lot of these are simple checks that the commissioning agent can provide, but unfortunately can be missed if there's not that third party there. And then there's also, can sometimes be the lack of temperature control and occupancy space comfort. When a building is finally occupied by the owner and it's a place of business, sometimes unfortunately mechanical systems could be lacking the proper control. So as something that Garrett had described with that mixed air temperature sequence, so you could be providing discharge air, meeting comfort, but you're also expending more energy than necessary. And then the reverse can happen where you're unfortunately not providing the space comfort that the occupants need in order to perform their work efficiently. When people are working in a comfortable environment, like their work habits, their efficiencies can increase themselves, thus providing benefits to the owner and to their place of business. And then finally, the last kind of common building issue without commissioning is just the building doesn't operate as the owner originally intended. Part of the commissioning process is documenting owner project requirements, what the owner is desiring for this building when they go and occupy, and the contractor, engineers, everyone leaves. It's then on their hands to figure out how the building is operating. And that's where commissioning is really desirable. And what we'll really be talking about is to make sure that, the end goal is to make sure the owner gets the building that they bought and paid for, and that the engineers, the architects that they designed for that owner, to make sure that they can be as efficient as possible while providing great space comfort, while at the same time saving or performing using energy efficient operations for their mechanical systems and other systems in general. So there's just a few reasons for why commissioning is needed. And so just a quick kind of definition of what new building commissioning is, in case you're not familiar with that. And it's essentially a quality focused process for enhancing the delivery of a project and performance of the systems in building. And they do that by verifying and documenting the systems that are to be commissioned. So that's to, the design process, the planning process, the construction process when the systems are being installed, and then during the occupancy phase where they're testing these systems to make sure that they are operating as intended to meet the requirements of the building owner. So it's a holistic process that really kind of emphasizes how the different components of a system affect each other and their performance. And the commissioning can also bring up, kind of like I mentioned during the pre-design, bring up fundamental questions early on so that they're not asked later on in the project in regards to maybe why this system was used, why are we operating this way. It helps all parties come to an understanding and achieve that focus of obtaining the owner's intentions and requirements for the building. So with that, we'll kind of go into some of the benefits of commissioning when both tangible, both non-tangible, for buildings that have been commissioned. First is just fewer change orders, as I described just at the last slide in regards to equipment being maybe just not ordered, or design deficiencies, or errors and submittals. The commissioning agent is there to help provide a third check, essentially, and they can help decrease the amount of change orders that might come through both the design and during the construction phase. And by reducing the number of change orders, you can lower the overall project cost. That's the main goal all parties are shooting for. No one wants to go over budget or for what the owner originally intended. So by reducing change orders, by reducing just mistakes made in design and in the field, you can reduce the overall project cost the owner will see at the end. Then, like I mentioned, the main goal is to make sure the building operates as the owner intended. Often, unfortunately, this is not the case, as there is no documentation on owner expectations or goals. Commission agent ensures early on that owner expectations are documented and updated. Things can change within reason, and so not updating that can lead to, unfortunately, finger pointing in the end of a project. And then, of course, review during the entire process as well. And then at the end of the commissioning process, the commissioning agent will normally provide the documentation needed for building operators to understand, maintain, and control their building. We want to make sure that operators are knowledgeable of the mechanical systems that they're going to be having, and also electrical systems, to make sure they're comfortable operating, maintaining those as well. So a commissioning agent provides that complete documentation. Normally this comes in regards like a system manual and a final commission report, which are items we'll get into later in the presentation. But they document key things that an owner will need to help with their operators and just have a general understanding of the building for both the present and for any kind of future, as Garrett had mentioned, recommissioning studies or things later on in the building's life cycle. Now, kind of more maybe non-tangible benefits of building commissioning would be, as I mentioned, improving air-to-door air quality and occupancy thermal comfort. The mechanical systems are a big part of that, and if they're not operating, as the engineer intended, or in certain sequences operate efficiently, you can decrease again the comfort of the occupants in there, which can then decrease their work habits, their efficiency, which just kind of can keep spiraling. So it's a non-tangible benefit that may not always be thought of and seen, but it's definitely something to stress to building owners that with commissioning you can provide improved indoor air quality and occupancy comfort through checking mechanical systems and making sure they're functioning as designed. Again, like I mentioned, with that you get the increase in occupant productivity. If they're happy, they're going to be working more efficiently and to the best of their ability. And then finally, all of these can attribute to energy savings, both during the occupancy and throughout the life of the building. If you have proper documentation on the building, if it's operating as intended, what the engineer needed and what also the owner needs, you can provide energy savings instead of kind of having band-aids per se on mechanical systems. Like you're getting by, you're able to maintain certain temperatures, but you're not using it efficiently, or the systems an engineer designed are operating one way but were installed a different way. So overall, it can provide energy savings for the owner in the life cycle of the building. So now we've kind of talked about, excuse me, the benefits of commissioning. Now I want to talk about some of the documents needed for efficient commissioning. Sometimes these aren't always brought, but these are, in my experience and what ASHRAE Guideline 0 has mentioned, efficient documentation needed for the building and for the owner to operate it efficiently. The first are just proper construction documents and as-built. Many times the design documents are not updated once the building is completed. And many times, things are just either maybe rerouted or designed a little differently, but then there's no documentation providing that to the owner. I've been in several buildings myself for recommissioning activities, and I would say almost 75% of them have no trace of construction documents. They have no really idea of what the basis of why they're building, like the systems were based on. So it provides just good fundamental things for other engineers, for owners, for facility engineers, just have to understand kind of the nuts and bolts of their systems. The next is the owner's project requirement, which is a document that describes what the building is designed to do. This is something that's created by the commissioning agent early on during the pre-design phase. And this is what kind of sets the bar for what's going to be needed in the design. This in the document, like we will discuss next, should be like reviewed and checked with the design construction kind of commissioning agent to ensure the owner project requirements are being met. Without this document, no parties know what they're shooting for in the goal. What is the end intention the owner required from this building? And the next one goes hand in hand with the owner's project requirements. The basis of design is describing how the building's systems are supposed to operate and what they'll do to kind of achieve those requirements and goals listed in the owner's project requirements. It's nearly a little more detailed. It provides, short narratives on the designs of the systems, envelope assemblies, mechanical lighting systems, and controls. Inputs, assumptions used, and even codes that the engineers and architects use for the design of the building. This just provides, again, a better understanding for the owner, facility engineers to really understand their building, so that when all parties have left, those that designed it, they still know the assumptions, the inputs, again, the nitty-gritty of the systems in their building. And then during the construction phase of the project, the commissioning agent will normally develop and distribute equipment installation checklists. So these are not meant to hinder the contractors at all. They're meant to be provided just as a check as they're going through installing boilers, chillers, piping, things of that nature, to ensure that certain things in the engineer specifications are being met. And it provides the commissioning agent basically documentation knowing that, okay, systems are ready, they've installed, they can now be commissioned. We don't need overlap of work. It just makes the process more efficient for when the commissioning agent can come on site and not hinder, say, the contractor. So it just provides a more efficient flow of work as the building and systems are being constructed. The next, which is really the heart of commissioning, are the functional or results of the functional performance tests. And so what functional performance tests are essentially test on the mechanical systems, the controls that they're doing that they've been designed and programmed with, to make sure that they match and align with the engineer and the owner's intention for how they want them to operate. So they describe, as Garrett was showing that mixed air temperature, how heating and cooling coils will react, how they maintain discharge air temperature, how is your outside air temperature, or how is your outside air damper being controlled? Are you efficiently economizing? Are you using more energy than needed while still meeting, discharge air temperature set point? So it's things like that the commissioning agent really gets involved with and make sure that systems are operating as intended. As many times these results can just be either not found, or again, the owner has no idea of any deficiencies maybe found during this testing portion and have no way to know if they were resolved. So it's the fundamental, like a really big portion of commissioning to make sure that those systems are operating efficiently as they were designed. And then from the FPTs, from site visits, from the checklist, the commissioning agent should always be keeping an issues log. And what this is, it's just tracking deficiencies and known outstanding items in one location so that all parties are aware of the outstanding issues, who's the responsible party, when is the proposed kind of solution time or fix time. And it just, again, allows the owner a check to make sure that when they're handed the building, all those deficiencies have been corrected, and even just as a reference for future, where maybe, just something they need to watch or something of that nature. So this is something that the commission agent should develop early on, maintain, update, and make sure that those deficiencies are resolved before the end of the project. The next is documentation on training. Again, this is something maybe not always thought of early on during the design phase, but it really should be brought to the owner, engineers' attention on what they need for documentation for training. In specific, like who needs to be there to make sure that they're going to understand the systems. Is it going to be filmed? Will it be documented? Will there be the correct either manufacturer's rep there or things of that nature? It can be very important, as in some of my visits and documentation. Unfortunately, either correct people are not there, or the training didn't cover maybe expectations what the owner wanted. So documenting those early on, putting them in the specifications by the engineer, allows, again, both the owner and then the contractors to know what's going to be required for training, so that everyone is satisfied with the end results of the training portion of the phase. And then finally, just documentation on like general maintenance programs. All this should be compiled by the commission agent for the owner. The commission agent will coordinate the respective parties needed to develop the maintenance program, and then offer suggestions on best practices for what they may have seen in past projects or in past work, and provide an outline of what needs to be performed and when on each piece of equipment. Again, this will help the owner in the life cycle of the building, instead of waiting until things fail, making sure they have a systematic approach to maintaining this, high efficient equipment they may have in their building, so that they're not running it into the ground and just losing efficiency as the building goes throughout its life cycle. So it'll help reduce the number of issues during the building's life cycle. This is documented, planned early on. And again, many of these documents are kind of living, breathing documents. They're updated during the building phase. And it's the commissioning agent's responsibility to make sure that that's continuously updated, so that the owner gets the final product and what's actually been done or will be performed for the building. The next one is the final commission report. So as the project nears completion, this is kind of the final deliverable, sometimes developed by the commission agent. It should have everything that we kind of talked about in the previous 2 slides to make sure that everything is in one location. Many times, unfortunately, either commission reports are just not there, or they're missing some of the information we discussed about, they're not updated, things of that nature. So it provides one accessible report for the owner to have all of those deliverables so they can go and easily check what commissioning did, and just have for future, for even recommissioning type summaries or studies they might have later on. And the final document is the systems manual, which basically includes all the other deliverables not included in the final commission report. So these are items such as like design documents, the specifications written by the engineer, making sure that the as-built for those design documents are completed. It's, you know, the mechanical equipment submittals, the final sequence of operations, which is something we'll get into a little bit later, making sure that the sequencing, the programming for mechanical systems, the written documentation of that the owner gets should be the final updated version of that, to make sure that they know how their systems are operating. And it'll be things of like maintenance programs as well. All of this is, again, just one resource that they have this as a reference, needing to know like what or how their system was designed. So these 2 documents are incredibly important for commissioning, and something that should always be strived for to provide to the owner. These 2 are kind of really the heart and final end results of commissioning, and can provide the owner with the best efficient chance of operating and continuously operating their building as efficiently as possible. So, well, what we just described about are, you know, what documents are needed for, you know, efficient commissioning. Unfortunately, and from my line of work as a commissioning engineer, from what I've seen and just from research and talking to others, unfortunately, there can be deficiencies in documentation provided by commissioning agents. Unfortunately, you know, we don't live in a perfect world, so commissioning agents would provide all of these documents and make sure that their heart is into it. Unfortunately, that just doesn't work. And one of the big things is making sure to have a motivated commissioning agent, making sure that they're on board, working, coordinating with all the parties. And one way to really motivate commissioning agents is to make sure that all parties understand the commissioning process and the documentation portion of that. So these next items are just things that I, again, have seen, done some research on, talked to other commissioning agents that just unfortunately are sometimes missed or are deficient in that final documentation by commissioning. And this one is, first one is a fairly big one, and that's an incomplete sequence of operations. So sometimes, you know, sequence of operations change as the project progresses, or they even lack detail initially. And this is where getting the commissioning agent on early on in the design phase is very helpful. The engineer could have one idea, one intention for how to operate the mechanical systems, but perhaps the owner has a few other buildings. They like to control their, you know, maybe per se their economizer using differential enthalpy instead of a single outside air temperature. And so without any kind of communication, the engineer would design it one way, but unfortunately it may not be what the owner was expecting. So the commissioning agent can really provide coordination, get all parties to talk, so that during the design phase, those sequence of operations can really be, you know, added some great details. They're coordinating with what the owner is desiring for their building to operate, maybe what they're comfortable with. And so again, this is something that's even used later on when maybe say another facility engineer is hired by the owner. They weren't there when their building was originally built. And so now they don't know how their systems are operating. And without a complete sequence of operation or one that's been updated, they are kind of maybe second guessing or don't have the proper, again, documentation to really learn how the building's operating. So making sure that the commissioning agent is updating those sequence up, or making sure those sequence operations are being updated. Again, both during the construction phase and really, we're really pushing commissioning agents on during the design phase. That's really where commissioning can shine. The next is just lack of the verification of some of the documentation we talked about. So some deliverables that a commissioning agent normally performs are a verification on the test and balance performed on the mechanical systems, point-to-point checkouts for controls on, again, mechanical equipment, documentation on like when site assessments were performed, who did they meet with, what did they view, and even equipment installation checklists. Some of that documentation can just be lacking, and then the owner has no reference if those things were checked out. Did someone verify the test and balance? Did someone look at the tab report? Did someone perform a point-to-point to make sure that dampers are fully stroking open, fully stroking closed, things of that nature? It just provides a reassurance to the owner that things were checked through the commissioning process. But unfortunately, some of those things can just be missed or just not properly documented. The next one is just lack of the commissioning test results in general. And this is for in regard to those functional performance tests. During those testing, you can fail a sequence if it's not, say, damper's not operating as intended. But if that's never, noted in the issue log during the construction phase and it's never fixed, then the owner is missing some of those results. They may see it have failed, but they don't know if it was corrected or not. Was action taken by the commissioning agent to ensure that what they just failed in those tests will now be resolved and fixed, that the owner receives the goals, the requirements that they specified early on in the owner project requirements. And then unfortunately, another big thing is just the lack of final commission reports. Maybe the commissioning agent performs all of these items, deliverables that we just talked about, but if there's no report containing all this, or even having it in one general resource, one location for the owner, things can be missed. The owner won't have all of the information, the data, the documentation that they need. And so unfortunately, the commissioning process could have gone ahead, but there again, no documentation for the owner to have for either future facility engineers, or again, for a lot of these are important for future potential studies done on the building later on, when other engineers come in and are trying to learn about the building. If there's no one resource encapsulating some of these deliverables, it can be very hard to really learn how and why a building is being operated as it is. So now we're going to look into, our key takeaways of what can really make commissioning efficient. And as I will kind of mention later on, many of these are from ASHRAE Guideline 0. It's a great resource for commissioning agents, engineers, architects, owners. Everyone can benefit from knowing these guidelines to ensure that all parties are motivated, wanting to coordinate together to make sure the building is operating as the owner intended. So again, to help avoid some of these deficiencies we talked about, the one big thing I really want to stress is for owners or engineers, getting commission agents involved at the pre-design phase. When you're doing your planning workshops, this is where the commission agent can shine with coordination. Again, it comes down to those owner project requirements and those basis of design documents, documenting the what and the how their building will be operating, and being able to update those as the design goes on. The commissioning agent can continuously update those basic design documents on owner project requirements as the project goes on. They're talking with engineers and maybe ideas change. Commissioning agents can plan review workshops. So making sure that all disciplines are speaking with each other. And this is really where the engineers, architects can interface with the owner, their facility staff, to make sure that what they're intending for how they're building to operate is exactly or as close as can be with the design from the engineers and the architects. And again, what we hit on earlier, confirming and documenting like training requirements during the design phase. I think this is an item that's missed or just not thought of early on, and it's more of an afterthought sometimes during the end of the construction process. But documenting what the owner needs, what are they looking for from training, who needs to be there, what needs to be discussed, how is it going to be recorded for future facility engineers, things of that nature. That these are big key items that during the pre-design design phase should really be coordinated and talked about to really make the construction commissioning process as efficient as possible. And then another one is, I talked about how final commission reports sometimes just aren't delivered. One thing a commission agent can do to make their process more efficient is to begin developing, compiling their final report during the design phase or as early as possible. Making sure, those documents such as point-to-point checkouts, site assessment, log reports, things of that nature are all compiled. And so instead of doing that, again, deadlines can really unfortunately kill efficiency. So by planning ahead, by developing, by compiling throughout the process, it can really help development of the final commission report. And it's what I have found personally helpful as a commissioning agent to make sure that not just at the end of the phase or at the end of the project, I'm checking to make sure I've done all of these deliverables. Just provides a more efficient operation for the commission agent and how they communicate with contractors and engineers. Another big item is making sure the commissioning agent can coordinate kickoff meetings for commissioning. Many times contractors could be caught by surprise, not knowing that commissioning was maybe part of the project. These kickoff meetings help contractors and commissioning agents come together and talk about what they need from each other in order to make sure that both of their deliverables are completed and that they're providing what the owner intended. Without these, again, commissioning agents could, come on site and the contractors had no idea commissioning was being involved. And so they may, not know some requirements that they need, and it can affect deadlines, change orders, things of that nature. So making sure communication is very important, and coordinating that with the contractors is crucial for efficient commissioning. The next one is, again, kind of really emphasizing maintaining documents throughout the project and not just at the end of it. Making sure that issue logs are maintained during all phases of the project. So if there are deficiencies found during the design phase, make sure those are documented and that there's a plan of action to resolve those. Making sure that they don't go fall off the radar, and then as the building's being constructed, oh, now we remember we had a deficiency in this design, what are we going to do? So they just help maintain and document things that were found and make sure that they are resolved during the construction process. And then finally, one last kind of key point or takeaway that I have for commissioning is really making sure that those sequence of operations are updated with final as designed sequences. This is crucial, and one thing I really want to stress is, again, when I walk into buildings doing retro recommissioning studies, the sequence of operations are nowhere near how their systems are operating, unfortunately. So making sure that those are updated with the final sequences, how it was intended, how the commissioning agent tested those based on the functional performance test, like making sure that any resolutions from those deficiencies that were found were corrected, and then making sure that those are updated either by the controls contractor in the control submittal or ideally both, also in the sequence operations and specifications by the engineer, to make sure that everything is jiving correctly, and so that the owner can pull up their final commission report or the systems manual, look at the sequence of operations, and physically see and read how their mechanical systems are supposed to be operating, and match that with as designed. And so there are many other, great takeaways, recommendations that can be found in ASHRAE Guideline 0, which is where a lot of the basis of the points that I talked about today can be found. Again, it just provides a very efficient process for commissioning, and goes into much greater detail for some of the items that I have discussed today. And so with that, if there are any questions, please feel free to email Garrett. He can send those to me as well. But again, we just, thank you for your time for listening to this. Make sure to kind of really go out there and stress the importance and what you know about commissioning now. It can really help improve the energy efficiency of buildings, and just make owners more comfortable with the construction process. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Cody. And thanks to everyone who's tuned in today. Hope we gave you something to think about and something to take away from this. Thanks.